Ibrahim Traoré and Antony Blinken. The 2025 Africa policy feud igniting X introduction in 2025, a significant diplomatic and ideological clash has emerged between Burkina Faso's interim president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, spotlighting tensions over African sovereignty, U.S. foreign policy, and the role of social media platform X in shaping global narratives. Traoré, a 37-year-old military leader who seized power in a 2022 coup, has positioned himself as a champion of pan-Africanism and anti-imperialism, rejecting Western influence in favor of partnerships with Russia and other non-Western powers. His outspoken criticism of U.S. diplomatic efforts, which he labeled imperialist, on X, has ignited a firestorm of debates about Africa's relationship with the United States, the legacy of colonialism, and the continent's quest for self-determination. Blinken, tasked with advancing the Biden administration's vision of partnership with Africa, has pushed for renewed U.S. Africa ties, emphasizing trade, democracy, and security cooperation. This clash, amplified by viral posts and AI-generated content on X, reflects broader geopolitical shifts and the growing influence of African voices challenging Western dominance. This analysis explores the origins of the Traoré-Blinken feud, the context of their conflicting visions for Africa, the role of X in amplifying and shaping the discourse, and the broader implications for U.S.-Africa relations and African sovereignty. Drawing on recent developments, web sources, and X posts, we delve into the motivations behind Traoré's defiance, Blinken's diplomatic strategy, and the polarized debates unfolding on social media. The rise of Ibrahim Traoré and his anti-imperialist stance. Traoré's ascension and ideology. Ibrahim Traoré, born on March 14, 1988, in Kera, Burkina Faso, emerged as a transformative figure in African politics following his leadership of a September 2022 coup that ousted interim President Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. At just 34 years old at the time, Traoré became the world's youngest head of state, embodying a new generation of African leaders disillusioned with Western influence and inspired by historical figures like Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary president assassinated in 1987. Traoré's background as a military officer, trained in Burkina Faso and Morocco, and his experience fighting jihadist insurgencies in the Sahel, shaped his worldview. His disillusionment with Burkina Faso's leadership, which he accused of corruption and inefficacy, fueled his rise to power. Traoré's ideology is rooted in pan-Africanism and anti-imperialism, drawing parallels with Sankara, often called Africa's Che Guevara. He has positioned himself as a defender of African sovereignty, rejecting what he perceives as neo-colonial interference from Western powers, particularly France and the United States. Since taking power, Traoré has implemented bold policies to assert Burkina Faso's independence. Expulsion of French forces. In February 2023, Traoré's government expelled French troops, ending France's military presence in Burkina Faso and signaling a break from colonial ties. Formation of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES alongside Mali and Niger, both led by military juntas. Traoré co-founded the AES in 2023 to foster regional security and economic cooperation, challenging the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, which he views as Western-aligned. Economic self-reliance. Traoré's administration nationalized gold mines, established a state-owned mining firm, SOPAMIB, and rejected loans from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank, prioritizing domestic revenue and resource control. Pivot to Russia and Turkey. Traoré has deepened ties with Russia, including alleged connections with the Wagner Group, and Turkey, seeking win-win partnerships, free of colonial baggage. These policies have resonated with a generation of Africans frustrated by persistent poverty, foreign exploitation of resources, and the failure of democratic governance to deliver stability. Traoré's charisma, youth, and media-savvy approach, bolstered by viral speeches and AI-generated content, have made him a symbol of resistance across the continent and the African diaspora. Traoré's rejection of U.S. diplomacy. In 2025, Traoré's rejection of U.S. diplomatic overtures became a flashpoint in U.S.-Africa relations. His criticism was particularly sharp following remarks by U.S. Marine Corps General Michael Langley, commander of U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, during an April 2025 Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Langley accused Traoré's regime of diverting gold revenues for personal protection and labeled it an illegitimate junta, prompting outrage among Traoré's supporters. Traoré responded on X, calling U.S. diplomacy imperialist and accusing the U.S. of undermining Burkina Faso's sovereignty. In a post dated April 24, 2025, he declared, "We will stand firm until our people are emancipated," rallying supporters to resist foreign interference. His rhetoric tapped into widespread African skepticism about Western intentions, particularly given the U.S.'s history of supporting regimes aligned with its interests while criticizing those that pivot toward Russia or China. The Burkina Faso Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement on April 16, 2025, condemning Langley's remarks as unjustified and politically biased, emphasizing Traoré's commitment to combating corruption and advancing national interests. The statement highlighted improvements in agriculture, education, healthcare, and security, as well as the AES's cooperative approach based on equality. Traoré's defiance was further fueled by allegations of U.S. involvement in regional instability. In April 2025, Burkina Faso's junta claimed to have foiled a coup plot orchestrated from Ivory Coast, a U.S. ally, shortly after Langley's visit to the country. While Ivory Coast and the U.S. denied involvement, the timing intensified suspicions among Traoré's supporters, who organized rallies in Ouagadougou, London, and Lagos on April 30, 2025, hailing him as Africa's Messiah. The role of X in amplifying Traoré's message. X has been a critical platform for Traoré's anti-imperialist narrative, with supporters and influencers amplifying his message through viral posts, memes, and AI-generated content. A deepfake video circulating in early 2024, depicting Traoré delivering a multilingual speech calling for African unity, garnered millions of views on X, TikTok, and WhatsApp, despite being debunked as AI-generated. Another video, falsely claiming a $5 million assassination plot against Traoré, amassed over 1 million views, illustrating the power of disinformation in bolstering his image as a Pan-African hero. Posts on X, such as one by General_Samto on April 22, 2025, amplified Traoré's defiance, quoting him as saying, "Either we agree to fight for our country or we remain slaves forever," in response to alleged U.S. threats. While such posts often lack verified evidence, they resonate with audiences disillusioned with Western dominance, particularly among African youth and the diaspora. A Reddit thread on r/Africa, with 57 votes and 67 comments, debated Traoré's leadership, with some users praising his anti-Western stance and others criticizing his authoritarian tactics. The proliferation of AI-generated content has complicated the narrative. A Reddit post on r/United Nations warned about a fake UN speech attributed to Traoré, highlighting the risk of misinformation shaping perceptions of his leadership. Despite these concerns, Traoré's supporters on X continue to portray him as a revolutionary challenging the global order, drawing comparisons to historical figures like Malcolm X and Kwame Nkrumah. Antony Blinken's vision for U.S. Africa ties. Blinken's Africa strategy. Antony Blinken, appointed U.S. Secretary of State in 2021, has prioritized strengthening U.S. Africa relations as part of the Biden administration's foreign policy. In a 2022 speech in Pretoria, South Africa, Blinken outlined a strategy centered on partnership, emphasizing collaboration on trade, health, security, and climate change. He stressed that the U.S. views African nations as equal partners, seeking to move beyond historical donor-recipient dynamics. African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. Blinken has advocated for renewing and enhancing AGOA, a trade program set to expire in 2025, to boost economic ties. Discussions with African leaders focus on making AGOA more effective, though some critics argue it prioritizes U.S. interests. Health security. The U.S. has provided 231 million COVID-19 vaccine doses to African countries and committed $4 billion by 2025 to train healthcare workers and support local vaccine production. Security cooperation. Through AFRICOM, the U.S. supports counterterrorism efforts in the Sahel and Horn of Africa, though its military presence has drawn criticism for perpetuating neo-colonial influence. Lobito Corridor, a U.S.-backed infrastructure project in Angola, aims to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative, promoting connectivity and resource access. Blinken's approach reflects a response to growing Chinese and Russian influence in Africa. During a 2022 U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, he emphasized African-led solutions to conflicts in Ethiopia, Somalia, and Sudan, while warning against Russia's destabilizing actions, such as its war in Ukraine and alleged support for coups in the Sahel. Blinken's response to Traoré's criticism. Blinken has not directly addressed Traoré's imperialist accusation, but his broader statements suggest a commitment to engaging African nations diplomatically. In a December 2022 press availability, Blinken reiterated the U.S.'s support for African sovereignty and territorial integrity, drawing parallels with Ukraine's resistance to Russian aggression. He argued that African nations, having experienced imperialism, should oppose actions that undermine independence. Following Langley's controversial remarks, the U.S. State Department clarified that AFRICOM's focus in Ivory Coast was on common security challenges, such as violent extremism, not coup plotting. Blinken's calls with leaders like Nigerian President Bola Tinubu and Kenyan President William Ruto in 2025 underscored U.S. efforts to maintain alliances with key African states, countering Traoré's narrative of Western interference. However, Blinken faces challenges in reconciling U.S. rhetoric with its actions. Critics on X and in African media point to the U.S.'s selective criticism of military regimes, condemning those aligned with Russia, like Burkina Faso, while maintaining ties with others, like Egypt. This perceived hypocrisy fuels Traoré's narrative and resonates with audiences skeptical of U.S. intentions. Challenges to Blinken's strategy. Blinken's push for renewed U.S.-Africa ties faces several obstacles: competition with Russia and China. Russia's military support and China's infrastructure investments offer African nations alternatives to U.S. partnerships, often with fewer conditions. Traoré's pivot to Moscow, including his May 2025 meeting with Vladimir Putin, underscores this shift. Historical baggage. The U.S.'s history of supporting authoritarian regimes and its military presence in Africa raise suspicions about its motives. A 2024 Pentagon report documenting U.S. drone strikes, including one in Somalia that killed civilians, has fueled anti-American sentiment. Domestic politics. The return of a Trump administration in 2025, as noted in some analyses, could disrupt Blinken's initiatives, with a potential America First policy reducing U.S. engagement in Africa. The X debates and African sovereignty. X as a battleground for narratives. X has become a central arena for debates about Traoré, Blinken, and African sovereignty. The platform's open nature allows diverse voices, activists, diaspora communities, and propagandists, to shape perceptions. Traoré's supporters use X to amplify his anti-imperialist message, often exaggerating his achievements or spreading unverified claims. A post by General_Samto, for example, falsely claimed U.S. threats of invasion, garnering significant engagement. Conversely, critics on X highlight Traoré's authoritarian measures, such as detaining journalists and drafting critics into the military. A Human Rights Watch report accusing Burkina Faso's forces of killing 100 civilians in March 2025 has been cited in X debates to challenge Traoré's image as a liberator. AI-generated content has further muddied the waters. Videos depicting Traoré alongside celebrities like Beyoncé or delivering polished speeches in English have gone viral, despite being debunked. Elude Quay, a senior analyst at Code for Africa, noted that the increase in such content suggests a coordinated effort, possibly linked to pan-Africanist or Russian propaganda. African sovereignty in the spotlight. The Traoré-Blinken feud has crystallized debates about African sovereignty, a concept central to Traoré's rhetoric and the AES's mission. Supporters argue that Traoré's policies, nationalizing resources, rejecting Western loans, and diversifying alliances, represent a bold step toward true independence. An Afrobarometer survey in 2025 found that 66% of Burkinabe accept military rule, reflecting support for Traoré's approach. Critics, however, warn that Traoré's alignment with Russia risks replacing one form of external influence with another. The U.S. and its allies argue that Russian support, including Wagner Group advisors, undermines Burkina Faso's sovereignty by tying it to Moscow's interests, such as access to gold reserves. Moreover, Traoré's postponement of elections until 2029 raises concerns about democratic backsliding, with Senegalese political scientist Fatou Sow noting the risk of entrenching military rule. X debates reflect this polarization. Users in Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya praise Traoré as a model for African leaders, while others question his reliance on Russian support and the sustainability of his reforms. The hashtag Traoré 2025 has trended alongside African sovereignty, with thousands of posts amplifying both support and skepticism. The role of the African diaspora, particularly in the U.S., has played a significant role in elevating Traoré's profile on X. Black American activists, inspired by his rejection of Western imperialism, draw parallels with their own struggles for autonomy and reparations. Nehemiah Frank, editor of the Black Wall Street Times, described Traoré as a symbol of global black resistance, resonating with communities affected by historical injustices like the 1921 Tulsa race massacre. X posts by diaspora accounts often frame Traoré's leadership as a call to re-examine global black solidarity, linking his policies to broader movements against systemic racism and economic exploitation. This transnational support has amplified Traoré's influence, making the feud with Blinken a global conversation about power, race, and self-determination. Implications for U.S. Africa relations. The geopolitical stakes. The Traoré-Blinken feud underscores the high stakes of U.S. Africa relations in a multipolar world. Africa's strategic importance, its mineral resources, young population, and growing geopolitical influence, has made it a battleground for great power competition. Traoré's pivot to Russia and China threatens U.S. leverage, particularly in the Sahel, where jihadist insurgencies and political instability require robust partnerships. The U.S.'s response, led by Blinken, aims to counter this shift through economic and diplomatic engagement. However, the perception of U.S. hypocrisy, criticizing Traoré while supporting other authoritarian regimes, undermines its credibility. The future of African sovereign titratress leadership and the AES represent a broader trend of African nations seeking alternatives to Western dominance. The AES's vision of a gold-backed currency and regional integration challenges the CFA franc and Western financial systems. However, the feasibility of these ambitions remains uncertain, with IMF analysts warning that a new currency requires robust infrastructure and global confidence. For Blinken, the challenge is to convince African leaders and publics that U.S. partnerships offer mutual benefits without compromising sovereignty. The 2025 AGOA Forum and potential U.S.-Africa Business Summit in Angola provide opportunities to advance this agenda, but Traoré's defiance and the AES's growing influence complicate these efforts. The role of social media in shaping policy. The X debates highlight the growing influence of social media in shaping foreign policy narratives. Traoré's ability to mobilize support through viral content and Blinken's need to navigate a skeptical online audience underscore the importance of public perception in diplomacy. The proliferation of AI-generated misinformation, however, poses risks, as false narratives can escalate tensions and distort policy discussions. Critical analysis and future outlook. Assessing Traoré's leadership is a double-edged sword. His economic reforms, including nationalizing gold mines and investing in agriculture, have yielded results, with the IMF projecting robust growth in 2025 and a decline in extreme poverty. However, his failure to quell jihadist insurgencies, with over 60% of Burkina Faso outside state control, and reports of human rights abuses undermine his legitimacy. His alignment with Russia raises questions about long-term sovereignty. While Traoré frames Russia as a partner without colonial baggage, critics argue that Russian support, particularly through the Wagner Group, comes with its own conditions, such as access to gold reserves. The AES's success will depend on its ability to deliver security and economic stability, a tall order given the region's challenges. Evaluating Blinken's approach. Blinken's partnership rhetoric is well-intentioned but struggles against historical mistrust and competition from non-Western powers. His emphasis on African-led solutions is a step forward, but U.S. actions, such as Langley's remarks and perceived support for anti-Traoré plots, fuel skepticism. The U.S. must address these contradictions to rebuild trust, particularly among African youth who resonate with Traoré's message. The path forward. The Traoré-Blinken feud reflects a broader struggle over Africa's future. For Traoré and the AES, the priority is consolidating sovereignty through resource control and regional cooperation. For Blinken and the U.S., the challenge is to offer a compelling alternative to Russian and Chinese influence without replicating neocolonial patterns. Both sides must navigate the power of social media, where X debates will continue to shape perceptions and influence policy. African sovereignty will remain a central theme, with Traoré's experiment serving as a test case. If successful, his model could inspire other nations to challenge Western dominance. If it fails, it risks reinforcing narratives of African instability. The U.S. must balance its strategic interests with genuine respect for African agency, while Traoré must deliver on his promises to maintain his popular support. Conclusion. The 2025 feud between Ibrahim Traoré and Antony Blinken encapsulates the tensions defining U.S.-Africa relations in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. Traoré's rejection of U.S. diplomacy as imperialist, and his embrace of anti-Western alliances resonate with a generation seeking autonomy, amplified by viral X content and AI-driven narratives. Blinken's push for partnership, rooted in trade and security cooperation, faces challenges from historical mistrust and competing powers. The X debates, fueled by supporters, critics, and disinformation, highlight the power of social media in shaping global perceptions of African sovereignty. As Africa asserts its place in a multipolar world, the Traoré-Blinken clash underscores the need for mutual respect and dialogue. Traoré's vision, while inspiring, must address security and governance challenges to succeed. Blinken's strategy, while promising, must overcome perceptions of hypocrisy to rebuild trust. The outcome of this feud will shape not only U.S.-Africa ties but also the broader narrative of African self-determination in the 21st century.